Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Matt Furness. Good morning to you, Matt.
Morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, good to see you. And you are the founder of Click Culture, and you're a company that turns company values into effortless habits, all about culture. And today we are going to be exploring how to do culture change differently and looking at the whole aspect of using habits or the insights from how we build habits in that
Yep.
context. Before we get into that, Matt, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
Yeah, so it's a great question. What I've noticed is that almost the norm in big businesses today is like either a toxic or a stale culture. And I feel like lots of people are going home feeling, either apathetic or burnt out or anxious or underappreciated. And at various points in my career, I've certainly felt that way. And lots of businesses are increasingly recognizing that they need to invest in their people and invest in their culture, right? The challenge, though, is that it feels like a problem that we just simply haven't cracked. So it feels like, although we've recognized that this has become a challenge, traditional methods for behavior and culture change are at best creating short-term momentum, but not actually long-term change. And so the reason that I love what I do is because I feel like this is a great opportunity to actually really make a dent in the world, because I feel like it's a problem that's recognized, and yet it's one we've not yet we haven't yet solved, right? So my goal, I guess, is to try and think differently and create alternative, new, better, more impactful ways of changing behavior and culture.
Fantastic. And obviously, culture change is a very big topic in lots of organizations, how they can change it, having the right culture. People talk about, cultural fit, talk about when you go for a job there, make sure you understand the culture. Does it work for you? And what is the culture all about? And you've already alluded to it, but in your experience, obviously, of your company and previous, what are some of the common, I suppose, mistakes or errors from your perspective people do in trying to change a culture within an
Yeah,
organization?
it's a really good place to start. So let me tell you a quick story that probably encapsulates the most common mistake that I see. So I was working with a big telecoms business, and we were doing some leadership development together. And they said to me, "Hey, Matt, we've done this before, but this time it really needs to be different. This time the new behavior really needs to stick." And I'll be honest with you, will this time be different? Perhaps, but if I'm honest, I doubt it. So gently prodding, I sort of said, "Well, if you've done this before and it hasn't worked, are we sure that leadership development is still the right way to go?" And they said, "Yeah, but we've got sign off. We've signed up for this. So we're bought into it now. We have to go with it." And for me, this perfectly encapsulates where the industry is at. There's almost this recognition that what we're doing isn't working. And yet, despite that, we're continuing to do the same things time and time again. We're reverting back to the same methods, whilst just making marginal tweaks to them, instead of actually fundamentally returning to the drawing board and looking for new, alternative, better ways than the things that we already revert back to, like leadership development, training, comms, all that stuff, right? And as the saying goes, right, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten, right? And I feel like that is the biggest problem that the industry has at the moment. It's not yet, it's just reverting back to these same old methods that don't quite seem to be working. And then the question becomes, well, why are these methods not working, right? What is it? And what I've done a lot of in the last few months is trying to answer that question, right? And what I boiled it down to is, if you look at all of the traditional methods for behavior change and culture change, so leadership development, comms, values, training, engagement scans, they all target one of two things. One is skills, so they try and give people new skills or new knowledge. Or two, they aim to motivate people to behave differently, right? So there's an assumption here that if people want to do something and they can do it, then they will. There's an assumption here that people who know better do better. But behavior science actually suggests that that isn't true whatsoever. And so that's why lots of current methods don't work. They almost treat human beings like they almost view human beings like we're conscious, rational beings with these like unlimited resources. But that's just not how we act. And our lived experience shows this too, right? Like, if that was true, would we really have such a hard time sticking to our New Year's resolutions, which we want to do? And we can do. We've got the skills and the knowledge. We know how to go on a diet and we might be motivated. But it doesn't work like that. That's not how human behavior works, right? So for me, that's where the industry is in this rut, right? It's in this rut. It continues to go back to these old methods that rely on this underpinning assumption.
Why do you think people are sticking to that old methods? What is it? I mean, we all know that facts, we keep doing the same thing, we keep getting the same results. We sort of know that, as you just said, that whole narrative.
Yeah.
What is causing people not to change or think differently? What's the blocker within a HR mind, within a CEO, within teams think we need to do something differently to get a different result?
It's a really good question. The reason I think that the businesses aren't cottoning on is a few things. One is that habits are an uncomfortable truth. So the research suggests that people overlook habits and sort of what people currently do in automated behavior, which we'll talk about in a minute, as a contributing cause to behavior. We like to think of ourselves as fully conscious, fully rational beings. Another thing is that the immediate feedback after these initiatives is good. So what happens is you might go on training and then everyone says, this is great, this is awesome, I'm going to change my behavior. So on the surface, things look to be okay. But actually, they're hiding a darker truth, which is, okay, short term, great. But actually, longer term, these don't work. So the truth is almost hidden behind this immediate positive feedback after the event.
Okay. What's your thoughts on, so I do a lot of one-to-one coaching with leaders. And obviously, there's an impact with that. What's your thought on that in terms of creating that cultural change? Because we know when a leader changes his behaviors, we know that role modeling is the most powerful way to influence people and see people see a difference by how they act. What's your thoughts on that as part of the tools of creating culture change?
So I think coaching certainly can help. It's not necessarily about getting rid of coaching. For me, it's about recognizing what really does and what really doesn't change behavior. And it's almost about instilling within methods like coaching and training this newer philosophy, which I can talk about in a little bit, as opposed to just putting them in the bin completely, because that would be throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, because I think, obviously, coaching from my perspective is not just about having nice conversations here. It's creating changes in their mindsets. It's creating new habits, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That approach, and actually creating real behavioural changes within individuals. And so that actually is something that is sustainable, fundamental, and will carry through rather than, as you say, a one-off training event. All great, everybody's enjoyed it, but 6 weeks later, everybody's forgotten about it, or they're not implementing those skills. So moving forward, you said about, a lot of organizations get caught up with motivation, get caught up with upskilling people to try and create that change. Talk us a bit more detail about why is that the approach, and why is that not working right now?
So the reason it's not working is because the barrier to behavior change, as I've just described, is rarely often it's not a lack of skill or motivation. The barrier is the F word, which is friction. So the right thing to do is rarely the easiest option. So that creates a kind of friction, right? And we can only overcome that. We can overcome that friction, but only if we invest our attention and our willpower. Now, the problem is that our willpower and our attention are limited mental resources, right? So we can invest attention and willpower for short periods of time, but then once they run out, we just revert back to what we did before, right? So as soon as we get busy, tired, and stressed, and by the way, we always will, we will just revert back to what we did before. So academics call this the triangular relapse pattern. So if you think about it on a graph, you start off not being good at something, maybe then you, I don't know, have a resolution, or you want to go on a diet, or you want to get better at feedback. And then for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you get much better at it. But then your attention and willpower run out. And then all of a sudden you revert back and you relapse to your old bad habits, right? So the truth is that behavior change and culture change will never last if it relies purely on people's willpower and attention, because those things will run out. So then a good place to start is by looking at, well, what do we do in those moments? What do we do when our willpower and our attention runs out? What do we do when we're busy, tired, and stressed? And the funny thing is that as a species, we follow the path of least resistance. So what we do is we fall back onto the easiest option. Now, often that easiest option is an automated behavior, which we commonly now refer to as our habits, right? So we go back to a behavior that we have learned we believe will produce a positive outcome, right? So the amazing thing here, right, is that people who are able to maintain consistency in things, it's not because they've got bottomless willpower, bottomless attention. It's just that they've automated the right thing to do. So even when they're busy, tired, and stressed, the automated habit, the automated behavior they're falling back on is the right thing to do, right? So it no longer requires their attention and willpower. And they've actually made the right thing to do the easiest option. So my whole philosophy here is that the culture change industry needs a paradigm shift. We need to focus much less on upskilling and giving people motivation, and much more on making the right option the easiest option. So put another way, it's not about making us better at our best. It's actually about making us better in the moments where we're at our worst, right? And that will allow us to maintain the behavior sustainably over time.
So we're talking habits here, isn't it? That's the simplistically thing about creating habits, which, as you just say, you fall back on whether you're feeling great or you're not feeling great. Yes. And that, so in an organization, obviously people have multiple habits going on. You got multiple people.
Yeah.
Where do we start with this? How do we sort of map this out? How do we start to put this in a place where we're not going around changing everybody's habits here, multiplying? There's something different. How do you go about that within an organization, within a team, to create habits that will be a positive influence on their culture?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this is where it gets really tricky, right? Applying the theoretical understanding and science and making it pragmatic. And I would love to tell you that I'm some sort of super genius who's come up with this all by myself. But the amazing and I think better news is that there is a successful science that's already being applied elsewhere, which we can learn from. So the science of habits and automated behavior is being built at universities like Harvard, Yale, Cambridge. It's been summarized in best-selling books like Atomic Habits by James Clear, like Nudge by Cass Sunstein, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg as well. It's even gained enough traction for people like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler to win Nobel Prizes for their research. And the best bit is it's already being applied in other contexts. So it's already been applied to successfully shift behavior in public services. So the government have a nudge unit. Lifestyle apps, like there's a app called Noom that helps you lose weight. Consumer marketing as well. It just that science just has barely been applied remarkably to shift behavior and culture in organizations. So where we start is we start by bottling that science and then start to pragmatically apply it in an organization. So in terms of how we actually do that, then the first thing you need is clarity on what good looks like, right? What are the actual specific behaviors that we're going after in our culture, right? So it might be, I don't know, we want to give feedback more, or we want to break down silos, or whatever it might be, right? The goal then, once you have crystal clear clarity on those behaviors that you want, is to turn them into effortless habits. So it's about creating the conditions around people that make the right behaviors almost inevitable and the wrong ones almost impossible to do, right? So that's when the science comes in. So behaviors become effortless when 4 conditions are met. So the right thing to do must be obvious. So it needs to be continuously triggered by something in the environment. It needs to be appealing. So it needs to feel enjoyable. It needs to be easy. So it needs as little energy to actually perform it. And then it needs to be rewarding. So by doing that behavior, ideally it should lead to a reward or avoid a punishment. Now, we can purposefully nurture 4 conditions at those 4 conditions by looking at different levels, right? So we can look at the wider organizational conditions. We can look at your immediate team conditions and context, and then you can look at your personal conditions and how you approach sort of your work and your life. So at an organizational level, the challenge here is this is about the conditions that span teams, regions, departments. So if tweaked, these are the systems and processes that will impact the greatest number of people. So it's about working, so business leaders and HR nurturing the right conditions that make the right behaviors inevitable. So to give an example, right, I work with a business who they want their people to take more accountability and, you know, to act like owners of the business, while simultaneously having a policy that if you want to spend more than £50 on an expense, you need to get sign off from your boss's boss. It's a really simple example of, well, that's a process or a structure that is therefore making the right behavior really quite hard to do, right? So how do you work with business? So the goal then is business leaders, HR leaders, monitoring that environment and putting the right systems, processes in place that therefore make the right behaviors effortless habits. At a team level, it's about how do we help team leaders to create the right immediate routines, team habits, ways of working that will make that again make the right thing to do the easiest thing to do. So this is things like team huddles or one-to-ones or charters, right? And there is some research suggests that this is actually far more important, your immediate team culture, than the wider company culture. And then at a personal level, it's about helping people to make and break healthier habits. Now, the amazing thing here, right, with the science of habit changes, there's one loop to rule them all. When you understand that loop, you can change any habit, right? So if people understand how to make and break their habits, doesn't matter if that habit is giving feedback or, you know, creating a strategy or whatever it might be, when they got it, they've got it. So to your question earlier around coaching, for me, this would be a great thing to include within coaching practice, helping people to come back to that habit loop and to understand how they can use that habit loop and the science of habits to make the behavior that they want to do automated and help it to stick over time. So it's quite a lengthy answer, but to summarize it, it's about creating those right conditions at different levels that therefore make the right thing to do an easy, effortless habit, and the wrong thing to do harder, a much more difficult thing to do. So you're not leaving the right behaviors to chance.
And I guess this is not overwhelming people with multiple things we're going to change here, because that can be too overwhelming, can't it? Almost picking some core areas,
Exactly.
organizational, all the way through, of what behaviors we want to do. And often organizations have, you know, behaviors we want to have in our organization, ways of working. And I guess it's identifying it through that, and then sort of working through the teams with that. It'd be good to just help understand people why those 4 components you talked about in terms of making a habit easier, why that works, why almost the process of habits, forming a habit, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. And it, you know, almost because I think to almost bring context to it, because I think we're all, as you say, New Year's resolutions or whatever you want to call it, we're all in the process of trying to change our habits, whether that's a bad drinking habit, smoking habit, or unhealthy habit of eating food, whatever it may be. Actually just talk through the process of that habit and why, and ways we can sort of make it easier, because it is all about making it easier in terms of a fallback to that, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll be thinking as I speak, as I give an example here. So it might not be the most refined example, but let me give it a go. So I spoke through those 4 conditions. So it needs to be obvious, appealing, easy, and rewarding. So those 4 conditions basically follow the habit loop, right? And again, this is not something I've come up with. This is something that's been sort of written up in other contexts, and I'm simply applying it to the context of behavior change. So the first step is with habit formation, there needs to be an obvious trigger. Now, the key here is that you're basically delegating control of your behavior away from your limited mental resources to the external world. So you might delegate it to a specific time. So you might have a diary invite that goes out every single day, and I've got this in my diary every single day, and that is then the trigger. It might be an emotion. So when I feel XYZ, then that's going to be the trigger. So it might be a location. So when I am in this place, it might be, if you're going to go for a run, it might be leaving your shoes by the door every night. So you can't leave the house without seeing your shoes. What's that trigger, that observable trigger that's really hard to ignore, that takes onus off your limited memory, attention, willpower, and goes, right, this is the thing that you said you would do. The second thing then is appealing. So it needs to feel like enjoyable, right? So how can you, and then with breaking habits, it's about how you make it the wrong thing not enjoyable, right? So an example tactic for making it appealing is temptation bundling, for example, right? So combining something you don't want to do with something you do want to do, right? So you're making that thing you don't want to do that you know is good for you more appealing. So I was reading an example this morning, this book on how artists work, daily rituals, and there was a woman in it called Patricia Highsmith. So she's written psychological thrillers, and she didn't enjoy writing despite being an author. But what she was saying is she would basically, around her desk, have cigarettes, an ashtray, matches, a mug of coffee, a donut, sugar. So she's basically really making it as appealing as she can to write, right? So if you're trying to build an exercise habit, how do you incentivize yourself to go to the gym to make it appealing? Do you, I don't know, stop by at your favorite place for coffee on the way back as a way to treat yourself, whatever it might be? The third option is easy. So it needs to require as little energy as possible to do, so that we don't make excuses, right? And the hardest thing is getting going. There's this whole metaphor around it's easier to move a sledge once you've got it away from the ice, right? The hardest thing is getting it to move. It's that idea. So a technique to use is downscaling the habit. So how can you do that habit or get started in literally less than 20 seconds? So if it's exercise, how do you just do 5 press-ups or whatever it might be? And the amazing thing is getting started, the hardest part, right? Equally, making it easy. How do you, when you get out of bed, the example I gave earlier is you have your clothes already put out for you have your shoes already put out for you. Or equally, if you're trying to break a habit, how do you make it hard? So if you're trying to lose weight, how do you do a automated weekly shop, so that if you're going to go buy chocolate, you've got to go out of your way to buy chocolate? So you're making the wrong thing to do harder for yourself, right? And then finally, rewarding. So it needs to lead to a reward or prevent a punishment. So an example tactic here would be a contingency contract, which is the idea that you're making your commitment public. So if you don't do it, you look like you feel like you're going to get judged because you've made this public commitment. So you're almost putting pressure on yourself to do it, right? So the amazing thing is, under each of those 4 conditions, there are dozens of habits. I've been writing up behind closed doors with the help from someone from my team, dozens of these like miniature tactics and strategies that you can put into place to make those behaviors obvious, appealing, easy, and rewarding. And again, to go back to your earlier question, for me, effective coaching would be helping people to apply lots of these little habit building strategies, right? So I don't see the two at being at odds with one another. And actually, I see them as potentially working really well together if the coaching is based around actually what changes behavior, as opposed to just going, what are you going to do about it, taking what they say on face value, and then being surprised why they don't do it when you talk to them again in 4 weeks' time.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. That's really helpful for people to hear, because I think, as you say, we talked about the organizational side, team side, individual, but there's a lot of individual here, and the swell of individuals changing their habits, and making sure they're doing their feedback with their sort of team, or whatever behavioral changes that are important to that organization, that team. The sum of the parts have a huge impact within an organization, which then starts to change that sort of culture. And in terms of that, what are you sort of seeing as almost metrics or indicators that should organizations use to measure the success of cultural change initiatives like the one you're proposing here?
So I don't think that the metrics that we should measure are any different to any other methodology, right? I think in reality, what we tend to do is we just measure like the level 1, level 2 type stuff. But the ideal things that we should measure with this methodology are no different from anything else we're doing. So ideally, we should be measuring, the impact on the business, which then you can make an ROI estimate, a financial ROI estimate. I think you should be looking at measuring actual behavior change over time in a longitudinal way. I think you could and should be looking at people's responses and people's feedback. So actually, like how you evaluate this methodology doesn't change too much. I think the challenge is more just actually doing it, because I feel like, again, as an industry, we're sort of stuck in this place with ourselves where we sort of know that we should be doing more than just sort of getting feedback from people to mark change, but we're not actually doing it. So there's no real change on that front.
Okay. Well, this has been really insightful, and I think hopefully other people listening or seeing this will see there's a different way of doing cultural change, and a different way that actually is something that will have a greater impact and have sustainability to it, because it will create sort of behavioral changes within individuals, within organizations. And I think the approach and the using habits as a way of doing that is certainly a bit of a paradigm shift within the industry, and I hope you get a lot of success with that, and I'm sure you are already. If people want to connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way, Matt?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, probably Matt Furness, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Equally, if you are interested in this approach, what I'd probably suggest is either getting in touch, or if you, on my LinkedIn page, there's a manifesto for effortless culture change, which basically describes the 5 beliefs that underpin the philosophy that I talked through today. And within that, there's a lot more of the actual detail behind what I'm saying, and there's lots of references to the actual behavioral science which I describe here. So if you are curious, then please don't hesitate to check that out.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt, for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.